Hey, nowhere else in the world would we climb an ice fall like this. Nowhere. You'd be nutter.
Number one thing is you have to be very mentally prepared for it.
Welcome to Nepal.
Thank you so much.
You climb the Mount Everest, right?
That's where I'm going.
The chronicles goddess of this sacred fountain.
This monastery was built in the 16th century. At that time, this monastery was already destroyed once by the avalanche.
I've never been to this country before. I've never been to the Khumbu Valley. I've never been to Mount Everest. It's not about this mountain. It's about you guys.
Becoming a mountain guide, it's not easy.
I want to say, all girls, you should come and you can follow your dream.
To Camp 2, it looks okay. And after that, I'll let you know.
What piece of advice would you give someone?
If you want to climb the mountain and go back to your home, just prepare for it before you come here.
Be scared and be intimidated and be humble.
There's a lot of crevasse, open crevasse.
I came to Nepal on a quest to explore this captivating country and to honor a childhood promise. But I leave with so much more.
What's up, everybody? This is Fred Richani. We have right here via Zoom a very special guest, a returning guest. He is an adventurer, an explorer, a fantastic filmmaker who's immersing himself in technology. Oh, and by the way, he also climbed Mount Everest, filmed it, and lived to tell about it. We are talking to the fantastic filmmaker behind the Quest series, Alex Harz. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. How's everything going?
Man, very good, Fred. And I greatly appreciate you taking the time and talking to me, and it's always good to see your face.
Likewise, my friend, and it's great to see you alive and well and healthy. You are diving back into Mount Everest this time in series format. For people who aren't familiar with you, you did release, of course, The Quest Nepal, which was a critically acclaimed documentary. Now you're converting that into a series called The Quest Everest. You also have The Quest Everest VR.
Yeah, The Quest Nepal, I spent 63 days in Nepal filming that. And of course, we climbed Mount Everest in conjunction with that as well. However, it was mainly about the culture, the history, the backstory, also the religion and the Civil War and that kind of stuff that people don't really get to hear about much in the West as it relates to Nepal. So, most people, if they think of anything about Nepal or even know where it is, they think, okay, well, Doctor Strange from the Marvel movies because running through Kathmandu. And of course, Mount Everest since 1953 when it was first climbed, kind of put Nepal on the international map. And then we kind of also drifted on into now getting into a deep, comprehensive, dual format about Mount Everest itself. So the brand new documentary, 2D documentary that's out on Apple TV, and you can also watch it, on Fandango, and you can watch it on Amazon Prime and so on, is a 97-minute documentary about Mount Everest and about the stories that you normally wouldn't see as it relates to Everest content, from getting the permits, from the, talking about the trash removal and the history and the economics and these kind of things. So it's a very comprehensive film about Mount Everest. And then, of course, like you talked about, I'm back and alive to talk about it. Well, because I also went up there and climbed Mount Everest and filmed the whole thing in virtual reality. So as of right now, I'm the only person that has a first-person virtual reality set of Mount Everest, and that film is called Quest Everest VR. That is also out, and both of those productions you can see, different links and information and photos about it at thequesteverest.com.
What was actually harder to plan for? Climbing the mountain or making sure you had all the equipment?
Gosh, that's funny because they're totally two different things, and you're absolutely right. So the question is, which one's harder? Well, I mean, the planning for the mountain is, you have to get all the story content that you want to shoot put together in pre-production before you go, and then training 2 to 3 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. I did that for a calendar year before I left in Nepal because I wanted to make sure that if there's one thing that wasn't going to be a limiting factor, because there's a lot of uncontrollable variables that can keep you from successfully summiting the mountain, the one thing I didn't want to limit me was my physical preparation. So when I went to Nepal to climb Everest, I was actually in the best shape of my life, better than when I played Division I college soccer. So, I made sure that preparation was good. But when you get on the ground and you actually start filming, with the 2D cameras and stuff through Kathmandu, which is a very unique, chaotic kind of environment. Well, again, all the stuff that you kind of thought, oh, okay, we're going to shoot here, we're going to shoot here on this and this day and this day, you can throw half of that out the window because it's very improvised, centric. It's, my back history in improv comedy served me quite well there because you had to do a lot of running and gunning and improvise with the environment around you because you can't really block off streets like you would in the United States. You can't stage shots. You can't green screen any of this kind of stuff. So, a lot of that was, very difficult to say the least. And then as you got higher and went towards Everest, it only became more difficult. So which was harder? Well, I mean, the hardest thing I've ever physically done in my life was climb Everest. Same thing goes. The hardest thing I've ever filmed and produced in my life was climbing Mount Everest. So, I guess it's kind of a toss up. You maybe when you watch the movies, you can kind of relate to, the audience might be able to relate to, you know what? I don't think I'd want to do this if I'm a film guy or if I'm an athlete or if I'm someone that wants to go to Everest. Maybe I wouldn't want to cross the ice fall or try to, walk across an 18-inch knife edge ridge. So we'll let the audience decide on maybe what's harder.
This is kind of like a nerdy question. I mean, was there any fail safes you had to prepare in case that the equipment failed? Because you are climbing up, it is getting colder and colder, and obviously your health could fail, but also, the equipment you have around you.
Yeah, absolutely right. We had batteries that froze. We had camera lenses that would freeze up or fog up. We had, for example, a base camp when we were trying to dump footage from previous days' climbs or from around the area that we had to drop off on the hard drives. Well, if there's no sun, then the solar panels didn't work. So our batteries that were, dependent on charging our computers and camera batteries and stuff, so we were constantly struggling with the elements. So yeah, I mean, the fail safes were just redundancy. We had, 7 2D cameras, going up to Everest, and we had the virtual reality camera, but the redundancies that we could only kind of put in were what we were filming that day, how many battery packs, how many memory cards. But then once you were actually filming, we were just hoping that it worked. So keeping the camera in a 40-degree down, suit to keep it close to your chest, to keep it, from freezing over, or keep it in your sleeping bag at night down by your feet, along with a hot bottle of water. So, your batteries would try to have the maximum amount of life and that your camera would operate. Yeah, these are the things that you were trying to do as a fail-safe, but at the end of the day, you just had to deal with whatever the mountain threw at you and, do your best as you could possibly can in those situations.
When did the athletics and the filmmaking performance aspect merge? And when did you put that together and say, you know what, I want to be an adventurer, an explorer, and eventually climb Mount Everest?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And we talk about it a little bit in the 97-minute The Quest to Everest documentary because of the gap between those two worlds was huge. So it originally started when I was 14 years old. I came from a lengthy soccer practice. I played high-level soccer, every day, pretty much throughout a calendar year almost. And I came back from a long practice, and I was sitting on my couch, eating some Doritos, drinking some Mountain Dew, probably the worst thing to take in after a 2-hour soccer practice. But at that age, you're burning it off and you didn't know any better. And I'm sitting on the floor on my couch and I'm watching something about Mount Everest. And that time I was living in Omaha, Nebraska, in the flat lands of Omaha, so it couldn't be farther from mountains or anything that had to do with mountaineering. But I saw something about Everest and I told myself, you know what? One day I'm going to climb that mountain out of sight, out of mind. Many years I'm sitting on my couch in Denver, Colorado, and I'm watching random daytime television, absolutely nothing to do with Mount Everest. I didn't even know what it was. It was so mindless. But for some reason, that recollection of me being a 14-year-old kid sitting on my couch in Omaha, Nebraska popped back in my head, and that little promise I gave myself that you're going to climb Mount Everest one day popped back in my head. The next day I said, okay, if I can't keep a promise to myself, how can I honor my commitments to anyone else? And so I started that long process, not knowing anything about mountaineering or what to do. Even though I was living in Colorado, I was doing traditional sports. Yeah, I would snowboard and ski, but I wasn't rock climbing. I wasn't mountaineering. Wasn't climbing any of the 14ers that are out here, which are the 54 peaks above 14,000 feet. But then I started off with snowboarding gear on, trying to climb a 14er in the middle of January, post holing up to my chest, have no idea what I'm doing, sweating my butt off, trying to get to the summit. Ultimately, I did, but man, it was miserable. And then I did a couple more of those, and then I realized, I got to get more serious about the formal side of things. And so I got into the mountaineering classes, rock climbing classes, wilderness survival, and all the different things that you need to know to go to these big mountains. And then that process of climbing bigger mountains, going to Argentina, climb the highest mountain in South America, going to Alaska and climb the highest mountain in North America, Denali. And actually that light bulb moment of blending my film and my athleticism and my dream really happened on the summit of Denali. I'm standing there about 11:30 at night, just me and my climbing partner, looking out over the beautiful Alaska range under that perpetual, endless Alaska summer that takes place during that time of the year. And I thought to myself, as beautiful as this view is, I can't just do this for the sole purpose of achieving a dream, risking my life, taking all this time, all the money and effort it takes to make this happen. I have to do something bigger with it, and said, okay, why don't I take my filmmaking experience? Why don't I take my international business background experience, and let's try to make something about this a little bit bigger through the story of a lens, because I knew that 99% of the world will never have a chance to go climb Mount Everest or have the interest in doing something like that. So why don't I take them along with them to Nepal and start this process of this ongoing documentary series and to make Mount Everest the feature point of the first films of these series.
Were there people in your life, close to you that were like, hey, Alex, like, what are you doing? Like, you're an actor.
Yeah, they were shocked because right before I had started the quest, I had an improv comedy radio show here in Denver, Colorado, which was the first live improv comedy radio show in the world, where people would call in after the Denver Bronco games or send a Instagram post, Facebook post, or whatever, and then we'd act it live over the air, kind of like Whose Line Is It Anyway? We had 24 different comedians that were part of the show, and we had a producer out of soundboard, and he would try to put us in those environments live over the air. And when I told the radio station that I'm going to start doing the quest and I'm going to go to Nepal to film Mount Everest and the story of the Nepali people and all this kind of stuff, they said, what? You're a comedian, what are you talking about? So they offered me another hour. I had a 1 hour show. They said, we'll give you another hour. Why don't we make it a 2 hour show? I said, look, I'm not quitting this for any other reason but the fact that I won't have the time in order to give both projects justice. My fellow comedians and the sponsors and the radio station, all that it takes to do that show. And then of course, training 2 to 3 hours a day, putting together a film production, and then ultimately going to Nepal. So yeah, that's what I was doing before that. And people thought I was insane, because when I'd go down to the improv shows I was doing in theaters or go to my radio station to do the weekly radio show, everyone was like, what? You're going to try to climb Mount Everest and you're going to film a story about it? And then later on, when I decided to film it in VR as well, they're like, you must be insane. And so, yeah, there was a lot of people that either thought I was nuts, a few that tried to talk me out of it, like close family. But then there were others that also said, you know what, go for it. Why not?
I imagine it was tough to balance that out, right? When you were training, when you were exploring, like, this is great. But then there's also the part of you like, yeah, obviously you want to make money out of this. That's your passion. But you're also like, man, like, I really have this creative itch that I need to scratch right now.
That's exactly right. And, my body was telling me everything to not do that, because I ended up losing 27 pounds of muscle mass after Everest and had permanent nerve damage in all 10 of my toes. And, that's not a good thing. But on the same token, I'm not playing college soccer anymore. So I don't really need to be that tactile with my toes anymore. And B, I got an advantage when if I stub a wall, I don't feel it. So that's great. And it's 3 feet from my heart. So I'll live, so as long as I can continue to create and continue to do these things, that satisfy that itch, like you said, at the end of the day, I can't complain. I'm humbly honored to have come back with 63 hours of 2D and VR content, and ultimately speaking, no less for wear, so I can continue to fill these itches and go on and do more quests and maybe some other projects that come down my alley that I have no idea even about yet at this day and time. So yeah.
For sure. And not to be ageist to anybody who's older than us that would want to climb Mount Everest, but I would imagine you also wanted to get ahead of this project and do all your exploration now while you still have your youth, while you still have your muscle and everything else, because it's much harder. So I would imagine down the road, acting, filmmaking, other aspects is still on the table for you.
Yeah, absolutely right. And that's exactly why we did this one first. The Quest is an ongoing documentary series, to take global audiences to these remote, rarely seen places around the world and take them on these educational thrill rides that they normally wouldn't experience themselves. And I knew that if I did Everest first, it kind of solved a couple things. It would give me the chance to honor that childhood commitment that I made to myself. Secondly, if I were able to be successful on Mount Everest on the VR side of things and on the 2D side of things and be able to present those stories to the world, I knew that I had a CV and a use case scenario that could be replicated. Now I'm pretty confident anywhere else that we go to shoot additional Quest productions, we can pull those off because we filmed on arguably the hardest, environment that you can imagine in order to film these productions initially. So it's no longer, oh, well, sounds great, but can you actually pull it off? Well, now we have that proof of concept in the bag. We have, several films to show for it. Now going forward, I think it's going to make it a lot easier. And also for any kind of other, production gigs that come along the way, people no longer have to question of whether or not you can stick me in this environment and whether or not it's going to work, because I think I can kind of shut down any of those kind of reservations given what has been done.
Did you have like a handshake deal in place with any distributor? Were they like, hey, man, if you're alive, we'll distribute this? Or did you kind of go into it blind thinking, all right, well, let's hope for the best?
A little bit of both, because ironically, when I was talking to Nat Geo and these other guys, before we went about the concept, they all to the T loved it. But the problem was that they said, look, you're going to climb Mount Everest. You're going to host this. You're also going to carry a camera to film some of this yourself. Well, okay, they knew that, well, we're not going to put our money behind that because the chance of success was very small. And I get that because, it's show business, not show philanthropy. At the end of the day, they need to also kind of cover their investment and also cover, their chips that they're putting out on the table. And so they said, well, Alex, I tell you what, if you're actually able to pull this off, come talk to us when you get back. And so that's exactly right, Fred. I mean, it's one of these things, half put in, but not really committed, because they knew that, well, most likely the chances are 20% or less that you're going to be successful on this. So why should we go all on this and put this kind of financial commitment and marketing, editing and all this other kind of stuff that they'd have to get in behind if they were to take on the Quest initially. But now that it's all said and done, now that we finished those productions, now that we have something to show and the distributors are like, yeah, we think it's fantastic. Now it's a different story potentially for the next one that we're going to shoot, which is going to be this year in Africa.
Can you just kind of give filmmakers and aspiring filmmakers an understanding of VR and just how it can be used in conjunction with 2D? Because I feel like there's a misconception, not just that the technology is behind the time or not there yet, but also the fact that it's tough to do both 2D and 3D.
It absolutely is hard because, again, you have to change the mindset of how you film something, right? For example, in 2D, you can hide everything behind the camera. You can have your crew back there. You can have the lights back there. You can have the actors. You can even be in a location that's not even depicted what's in front of the camera, right? You can't do that in VR, or at least on VR 360. So, the camera doesn't lie. If someone just turns their head around, they can see exactly what's behind. Or if they look up, down, left, right, you're fully immersed in the environment. You can't cheat that like you can in 2D. So the mindset of how you set up a shot is completely different. Now you can try to tell the story the same, meaning the content, but also you can't punch in on close-up shots. You can't do wide shots. You can't do all the different camera angles that you would do, what you would do in 2D, and you can't guide an audience down on rails like you would in 2D on a roller coaster or right down a path where the director has taken, the audience to the story that they want to see, and they're guiding them specifically down a path. You can't do that in VR because you can't stop somebody from saying, hey, I want to look at that bird over there, or I want to look at Alex's feet as he's walking across the crevasse, when the story's maybe talking more about an avalanche that's coming off the west shoulder of Everest. So you got to give the audience the freedom to experience the content that they want to experience and how they want to experience it. So it's a complete different mindset in VR. So that presents its own challenges, but it also presents its own rewards, because nothing is going to get you in the story and be more immersed in the content than in VR 360. Nothing. And for example, standing on the summit of Everest, which is this photo right here behind me, you can't get how grandiose that is on a flat 2D image, unless you put the headset on and you're standing there with me on the summit of Everest in VR and look 200 miles into India and 200 miles into China and 200 miles into Nepal. You can't really get that scale unless you have that 360 immersion, and VR is the only thing that would give you that. So you have to kind of make a decision from a filmmaker. What is that I need to get the audience to understand, or what do I want to share with the audience, and how important is it that I share to them in 2D versus in a VR perspective? So not every story kind of lends itself also to be in VR, but on the same token, not every story is as powerful in 2D as it is in VR. So you got to kind of balance those things out. And also you have to say, all right, where is the tech going? How far ahead of the curve is? Well, right now it's still, not the mainstream to be, immersed in Apple Vision Pro or Meta headsets or Sony PlayStation VR and these different VR platforms. But eventually, that might be the norm. And as things look, it probably will be the norm. So you have to question yourself, okay, where do I want to be and what is it the story I want to tell and who is my audience right now versus maybe 5 years in the future.
Love that. And of course, people can check it out, thequesteverest.com. You can check out the Quest Everest 2D documentary, as well as the counterpart, the Quest Everest VR. Alex, you've been so gracious with your time. Before we let you go, we always like to ask all our guests some random and rapid fire questions just to get to know them better. Are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
What made you fear for your life more? Flying into Nepal or climbing Mount Everest?
Oh man! Well, when I was flying into Lukla, it was flying into Lukla, but when I got on into the Khumbu Icefall and the rest of the way, it was definitely Mount Everest.
Now, I don't know how much you follow professional wrestling, but there's a pro wrestler by the name of Darby Allin who wrestles on AEW every week on TBS and TNT. He's actually taken some time off. He's a bit of a risk taker, to say the least. He takes these crazy bumps. He is actually taking a break from wrestling to climb Mount Everest.
Wow.
Now, a lot of people are worried about a young guy, in the prime of his career. What advice would you give Darby Allin if he was watching or listening to this to climb Mount Everest?
Well, I'm assuming if he's a young guy, he doesn't have any kids, right? And if he doesn't have any kids, then I can tell him anything he wants to know. And if he wants to hit me up or you want to connect me, I'll be more than happy to give him my 2 cents, and he can take it or leave it. But I would say first and foremost, how big is he? How much does he weigh?
I think definitely under 200 pounds. He's on the smaller side.
Well, he's on the smaller side. Well, that's beneficial. Okay. I think the most important thing is to try to get to high altitude as much as you can before you go. I don't know if he has an experience at high altitude because that's a genetic thing. And the thing is, you don't know how your body reacts to high altitude until you go there. So if you can't choose your parents wisely, which none of us could, you don't know how your genetic components of this is going to affect you. So you can train all you want. You can, run a marathon. I ran over a marathon and a half every week getting ready for Everest. So you can do the cardio, you can do all the training, the weightlifting, the step ups, the backpack work, all that kind of stuff that'll get you physically prepared. But you don't know until the genetics about your genetics until you go to that altitude. That's one thing I'd recommend. The other thing, of course, is getting used to being isolated, not being able to see somebody that you normally see for 2 months, because that's how long it takes to climb Everest, and to have to be able to be mentally in the game day in, day out, day in, day out. When your body's telling you, what am I doing here? I want to go home. I have no business being here. We're not meant to survive here. You have to continue to lie to yourself and motivate yourself to continue to keep on going. So those are 2 things that I would highly recommend that he does. And again, like I said, I'd be more than happy to help him out if he's interested and wanted to hear from me.
We have mutual friends, so I'll definitely see if I could connect you two for sure. But thank you for that. I'll definitely pass it along on social media. We'll see if he responds. What was your most awkward moment in filming the quest?
Yeah, I would say probably maybe not the most awkward per se, but the thing that struck me back initially when we got to Nepal to start filming was when we went to Kathmandu, to the Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu, which is a Buddhist temple. And they do 24/7 live cremation there. And it's something that really takes you back, especially from being a Westerner, to see open air cremation, Game of Thrones style. That takes 2 to 4 hours to burn a human body over a stone platform with regular fire. That kind of threw me back. And to talk to one of the Hindu sadhus, which are these Hindu wise men, and about these, experiences of the afterlife, reincarnation, as I'm witnessing these cremations for hours, about 8 hours of filming there. That kind of threw me back, and going back to the hotel and having my clothes smell like a campfire, but because of burning bodies. So yeah, that was pretty awkward to say the least, and it kind of humbles you pretty quick. And then everything thereafter, kind of kept me grounded for what I was going to experience next, which I had no idea what that was going to be in many cases.
Where you're at, man, that's a pretty spiritual place too. So not to go too deep into faith and anything like that, but when you were climbing that mountain and you had to dig deep and everything else, did you look to faith, did you look to the universe, self-belief and endurance? What kept you going?
It was a combination of all those things, and the guy that I was climbing the mountain with most of the time was also the first person that picked me up in Kathmandu at the airport was Tashi Sherpa. And he became my brother from another mother father, as he calls me, because I climbed with him all the way to the summit. We had the whole upper mountain to ourselves. We had the whole summit of Everest alone for 45 minutes to ourselves. And he was a former Buddhist monk. And so I learned a lot about Buddhism and spirituality spirituality, a lot of the stuff that I never, thought much about, when it came to how that affects you personally in the moment. And when I was on the summit of Everest, having our little bromance, I broke down and cried. And, probably a lot of it had to do with honoring that childhood commitment but I was only halfway up. I wasn't back down, and you got to make it back down alive in order for it to count. So maybe it wasn't so much that as was the fact that the mountain itself, as the Sherpa people call it, is Chomolungma, which means goddess mother of the world. They physically believe that Mount Everest is the goddess mother of the world, where we have this vague construct of maybe it's the weather, it's the mother nature or whatever. No, for them, it's Mount Everest. And to stand on the summit of Everest and to be able to pay homage to the goddess mother of the world and for her to allow us safe passage to step on her, vaulted summit was something that just strikes you, being there was such a very spiritual and humble person, Tashi. And I think that was something that I will always take and something that will affect me for the rest of my life.
That's powerful, man. I love to hear that. And have you seen any negative effects of climate change, or really just not respecting the land per se in your exploration?
Yeah, the respecting the land thing, you see all the time, and that can be locals as well as people coming over there. Of course, you see it when you go to Nepal with regards to some of the trekkers that go over there, or even some of the climbers to not as big of a degree, and the tourists just walking around Kathmandu. A lot of people sometimes forget where they're at, and they forget to take, that extra moment of respect for the Hinduism or the Buddhism, or for example, Nepal's a communist country, technically by how it's governed. So, these are things that a lot of people don't know anything about when I go there. And so they don't necessarily take the time to do their homework when they are there in order to provide that respect that maybe the country needs. And I think that was one of the things that I try to focus on the most, and will continue to focus on moving forward, is that it's not really about me. When you watch the films, it's not really about me. I'm just the conduit to the information, to the monks, to the sadhus, to the Tashi Sherpas of the world, that provide this amazing content information and to allow me to explore what their home is, and to be able to tell that story to the people back across the world, to tell Tashi's story and to tell these other amazing people's story. And I hope that's what people get when they watch The Quest, is that, look, I'm just a conduit to that information. You're just basically getting, the experience through me because I'm there providing it to you. And to be able to pay homage and respect to these people every step along the way really means a lot. And that's what we're going to do next with our next quest as well.
You mentioned the next quest. I'm not sure how much you can talk about it, but you did mention Africa. So can you talk a little bit about the next quest and what people can expect with this upcoming series?
Well, what I can say, it's going to it's going to engage 3,000 years of culture. It's going to be a very, very diverse production with the various cultures that are going to be engaged in this one. And let's just say it's going to take place in East Africa. So that's about as much as I can give away at this moment, but it's going to cover 3,000 years of culture and this, transvergence of these amazing different cultures that have then coalesced to form an amazing community and an amazing country in the heart of East Africa. So that I can tell you, and you'll be one of the first to know once we're done and when we're back with it, and we'll talk about that hopefully down the road as well.
Awesome, definitely looking forward to that. Well, to get you on another high note, no pun intended, you've been successful in athletics. You've been successful as far as an actor, as an improv artist, in filmmaking, and with The Quest. For anybody watching and listening to this, what's the best piece of advice you give for success?
You know what? I think I'll give you two pieces of advice. Is one, that if you have a dream, like I had that when I was 14 years old, telling myself on that couch, that I forgot about it for a long time, but it sat back here in the back of my head. But I still, for some reason, was able to recall that. Whenever that light bulb moment comes to you, find a way to be hyper-focused on that dream, because if you have the dedication and you have the determination and you have half the brain to try to make this a reality, you can make that happen. And if you don't try to make that happen, I think you'll live with regret, because in my opinion, you might only have one crack at this. You maybe have multiple cracks if you're reincarnated, in the Buddhist or Hindu faith. But if not, if you only have one crack at this, you might as well give it the best whack you can versus living in regret years down the road. That's one thing. The second thing is what I learned from Mount Everest is, and this goes for any athletics or any other athlete out there, even playing Division I college soccer, I had to go 20% 20% harder than anything I've ever done in my life, physically and mentally, in order to make it to the summit of Everest and to come back down alive with the 63 hours of content that we have. And what I can tell you is if you have put in 80 hours a week at a job, you've got 96 hours to your disposal, even if you don't think you can do 80. If you ran 3 hours today, you can run 3.5, 4 hours today. So what people don't realize that everybody has 20% more left in their tank. And if you combine that extra 20% with that dedication to go after your dream, you have a very good chance of being successful at that, or at least giving yourself the best chance of making it happen. So those are the two things that I can really, really say is that go after that dream and give it 20% more than you've ever given anything else in your life up to that point.
I love it. Wise words from a wise man. Alex, thank you so much for the time. Before we let you go, where can fans find you online and where can we find you next?
Yeah, well, you can watch The Quest Everest and The Quest Everest VR via thequesteverest.com. Again, thequesteverest.com. You can also follow me on social media if you want at Alex Harz on Instagram. So that's alex.harz. I have alexharz.com website. You can go to the Quest Series on Instagram, the Quest Series page on Facebook. However you want to follow us along, that would be great. And of course, if you send us any kind of DMs or anything like that, I'll be more than happy to try to answer your questions and, give you any kind of insight that I possibly can, be it on Mount Everest, be it filmmaking, or be it anything else that I might be engaged in. So yeah, that's pretty much the best way you can try to follow me. But I would say the easiest way, thequesteverest.com.